These days, when I get an opportunity like this one to talk, there is something inside that says, at this age and where you are in life, what is it that you would want to give to people as a distillate of your experience? It's easy. It's the month is Adar, the year of the pig has started, and Purim is about to come, and one could tell lots of wonderful, funny things, but I don't feel that that's my task today. Psalm 90 begins with the words, Psalm 90 has a heading that says, a prayer of Moses. I can imagine that he must have been not quite young when he said that. In fact, it reminds me that most probably that poem, the French poem Moïse, where Moses stands on the mountain and looks over his life, that's about the place where that psalm comes. Adonai, ma'on ata hayita lanu midor dor. O God, you have been our dwelling place. The usual translation is from generation to generation. But from a mystical point of view, it would say, in each incarnation you have been our dwelling place. So here we are again, and looking back, what is it that I find is so necessary to share is the attunement to that which is subtle, to that which is, if you will, enchanted, magic. Because there is enough in what we see in the world that brings us to the tragic, to the despairing. You hear the news every day. You hear that no matter what we did about global warming, we are already pretty deeply in simply of the time that it will take to recover its balance. So there is a way in which the news that we hear and the experiences that we have would put us into a place that would be despairing. And yet, I'm not talking to the people on Wall Street right now. This is Naropa, and this is where people sometimes, oftentimes, the only place I know where there is a practice week. So spirituality isn't far from you. And the question that people like we need to give time to is, how do we create those cities of refuge in time for ourselves, where we can go to that place which is both the lonely place and the sanctuary deep inside? Because you know that sometimes, no matter how good a friend you have, there are some places inside of you that you still wouldn't want to take your friend there. And it's not because you're ashamed, but because they're so precious to you that you don't want them to be treated in an offhand way. This was brought back to me, all right, in the way in which a child brings a glorious flower to her mother, and the mother says it's just a dandelion. The child saw with beautiful eyes and full appreciation of the wonder of what that was about. And just by naming it in the way in which it was named and thinking of it as utility and what have you, as a nuisance that infests my lawn. So it's necessary to recapture that look that the child has And if our spiritual homework that we do doesn't give us some of that enchantment, I want to say, choose a better one. There's a lot of grim holy work being done. I remember asking a good spiritual friend before taking a 40-day retreat, what do you think of my plan? And I laid out all the things that I wanted to do, just, with that grim way. And she said to me, nah, just go and pamper your soul. Go and pamper your soul. And I think that this is a very important element. And I think it takes every day a little bit of time spent to go there. Most of the time when we do religion or spirituality, I want to say religion. The other day I put the word religion in my mouth just to taste it, It was very boring. It didn't have it tasted. I would want to say, give me another portion of that. It's like, yes, I'll eat it, Mother. It's good for me. So if you get the sense that what is it that is not boring and that would fulfill that wonderful inner need that we have to say, yes, I understand the romance of why God created me and put me into a body of flesh to experience what I experience. I can feel it. I can tune right back into that. And that requires us to understand a little bit more, to have better words than we have for intuition and for affect. We've got good words for reason and for sensation, but we don't have enough good words for intuition and affect. And it's precisely in that garden, in that sanctuary, where whatever we experience turns out to be ephemeral for us, because there is no way in which we can give it a file name and put it on the hard drive of our memory. Do you know what I'm saying? It's too vague. We don't know how to hook it up with something. And that's where there was a great deal of wisdom in the way in which Catholics used to do Lectio Divina and how we studied Torah. Because in this reading of those sources, and we become acquainted with the people who were also struggling to find words for the unsayable. You read St. John of the Cross, who's trying to tell you in una noche oscura, in a dark night, I came to a place I don't know where it was and what it was. And yet in the same time, as you follow him in his poem, you get a sense that, yes, I know this place. And so this is where religious and holy poetry gives us a sense of hooking in some of those ephemeral moments that we have in which we feel a closeness to the divine, and give us a chance to recall them. And I don't mean recall merely in the sense of remember, but log on to recall them, because if there is eternity there, what's necessary is to know the URL, if you will, where that website is inside in our inner space, so that we can log on to it. The next part is that this is very important, that this should happen with friends. One log will not make a good fire in a fireplace. We need the social element, and I want to tell you, from the place where I'm sitting at this point, when I hear some wonderful, if you will, inspirational speakers talking about what is important for the individual. On the one hand, I want to say, yay, it's true. But I also feel that when there isn't a community of the people who are doing that kind of work, it is, first of all, very easy to fool oneself. And second, it doesn't sustain itself. I'm not always in the place where I can enter even my own garden. But when I come in and I'm with people and someone greets me with a smile and sometimes with a namaste and says, I salute the God within, and I would go and say, oops, yes, hi. And I can then go and tune in myself, but it's somebody else who has brought it to me. So the necessity of Sangha, of Chavurah, of being together with other people with whom you can have those conversations that Sufis call sohbet, speaking about the deeper things with one another. When you have that, something very special happens. Now I'm going to let this dangle for a while because I told you I'm going to give you reflections. I'm going to go reflect in another place now. I asked myself, what is it that makes religion so boring these days? And I checked out and saw that over the last, mostly from about the time of the First World War on, whenever people spoke about religious things, they tried to impress the cortex. They came in the train of people who were doing this in the late 1800s in Germany. And each one wanted to claim that their religion is a religion der Vernunft. It's a religion of reason. I remember the title of a book that was called We Have Reason to Believe. And, and this keeps coming up all the time, that it's important that reason should be able to at least get out of the way, if not agree fully. And this is what comes up from time to time in issues around the anthropic principle, about conscious design of creation. And I want to get back to this thing. So what is it? In trying to address the cortex, we are always talking about things that already happened. There isn't anything new in the cortex, as it were. The cortex takes things that we have thunk before and tries to keep order, if you will, on the desktop of the mind, just to make sure that we can find what we need to find and understand what we need to understand. But the issue of inspiration and of dedication, something that would take care of our longing, doesn't happen when you forget the other parts of our being. And how much we have forgotten the other parts of our being. At one time, I had moments when I was tempted to become a Roman Catholic. You can't help this when you hang out with somebody like Thomas Merton and some Trappist monks and so on and so forth. And it was beautiful. They had so many wonderful things that they did, There were matins and lauds, and there were novenas, and there were all kinds of things that people did. And if I were to take a look and what's left for them, 20 minutes of a Mass on Sunday morning, and that's all. The checking in that used to be done before you could take communion by going to confession, that's sort of gone by the wayside. General confession, sacrament of penance takes 2 minutes to get past. Do you see what I'm trying to get at? How empty the tool chest, if you will, of religions has become. When I look at our own Jewish constituency and I see, and I'm very glad that there is such a thing as Jewish renewal. And I'm glad that we have sometimes full congregations without a bar mitzvah. And that's great, that's wonderful. But where, darling, where are you during the week? What is it that during the weekday times that you do? And so I feel that's gotten empty. We don't have the rituals that used to touch in very deep places. It's true that those of us who are a little bit acquainted with neurology, brain physiology, will know that there is such a thing as a reptilian brain and a limbic brain. But you know what? They're very hungry. They haven't been fed any good stuff. The religions that have fed only the cortex have not done so well to feed the limbic. The limbic is what happens when we zig and zag together, when we sing together, when Sister Act is doing her thing, when there is a feeling of we-ness that is great and wonderful, that connects us both to our animal nature and to the divine at the same time. And when these celebrative things are lacking, there is, in the original meaning of the word vitamin, something that keeps us in life, missing. The other thing is also that by this crazy thing that has happened to the way in which people, sometimes you speak about how the preponderance of the means over the end has happened in many ways. Not that the means serve the end, but all of a sudden the end has to serve the means. And how does that work? I realized that when I read most of the pronouncements that come from religious powerhouses, that they want God to serve religion rather than religion serving God. And when I get to see this, then I come back to this business about the boringness of the thing. And what else is happening? You must not have a direct line to God that isn't approved by us. That's the way it usually goes. If you can't see it in the rearview mirror, it doesn't exist in divine reality. Now, once you begin to allow for intuition and for the place in which people could share an intuition, and here I want to give credit to Friends Meeting, to the silence that's there, and to the way in which people get up and speak when there is something to be said that could be said in a short sentence. Oh, how I wish that most synagogues and churches would at least take 20 minutes at each service to allow for that silence and for fostering that intuitive opening to revelation so that these things should be able to come through. What has happened instead is that because so many demands are being made about how to present yourself socially in synagogue and in church, that most people don't have a sense that they're in safe space. And here is where I want to give credit to the holy rollers, to people of that sort where you come into church and you don't have to feel you're in unsafe space. If Spirit wants to take you over, mazel tov, go with it. And I don't have the sense that most of the time, the people who are set that the service has to begin at such and such a time and be over in an hour and a quarter then the collation is going to spoil downstairs, then I have the sense that this isn't going to happen, that Spirit won't get a chance to enter in, and so it'll be boring. So the reptilian hasn't been nurtured, and the limbic hasn't been nurtured, and the intuitive hasn't been nurtured. Where is it that the limbic and the reptilian have gotten food? When I start looking at the way in which people become violent for the sake of religion, when I look and I tell you, for all my honor that I have for the religion of Islam, I feel so sad that there aren't enough voices that dare, even if it would cost them their life, to speak out and say, this is not Allah's will, that faithful of the Shia should kill faithful of the Sunnah, and that the people of both sides should kill other people who are people of the book and who are like people of goodwill, like the Hanafis that were even before Muhammad in the world, who need to be respected for the way in which they are. Instead of that, that reptilian gets fed with aggression. And the sense of even the limbic, you know, the news keeps coming on every time, but how quick it is to forget what it means to sit in a car, in a truck, and know you're going to be driving in there and you're going to be pushing that button and you're going to be blown to smithereens with other people at the same time. What is it that fuels that? You know, we are worried about that uranium is going to be enriched. What is it that enriches, if you will, or impoverishes, if you want to say it better, the reptilian brain to such a thing that it would want to create these kinds of blow-ups? So toward the end, I want to get to talk a little bit about the R&D, the research that we need to do in these areas. There's always too much. So, okay, we still have a little time. So I started to read some more. Okay, I see what's going down. What's going up? And so I got to read Ray Kurzweil. Do you know who he is? Let's see hands up if you know who he is. Okay, then I better explain a little bit. If you have a good synthesizer in which you can make music, Ray Kurzweil did it. If there is a way in which you can put speech to text on a computer, Ray Kurzweil did it. The best work in artificial intelligence has been done by him. So he is talking about what's about to happen in the future. And nanotechnology, and they talk about all these wonderful enhancements that are about to happen. There's a nice acronym, which at this point I forgot. It has something to do with no, the word doesn't want to come right now. Some of these things have to do with information technology. Some of it is digital. Some of it is biological enhancements, and so on and so forth. And I forgot the other, and nanotechnology, right. So when you hear about the possibilities that are there to create small engines that should be able to go in, nanorobots, if you will, and find cancer cells and eliminate them, that's remarkable. I'm so grateful when I had to have a major operation to repair my diaphragm, which was torn inside, that they were able to do it with laparoscopy. The advances that are there, thank God I don't have to have a pacemaker. But I already have different lenses under my cornea, you know. The dentures are an old deal already. But if you can start asking what are some of the other things that can then later on be done to enhance genetically by using what we can do genetically, and to implant such things that would be able to overcome problems of Alzheimer's and keep a person able to communicate. So I follow Ray Kurzweil in his description of some of the things that can happen to the point that there has been an old question: how do I know if a computer can think for himself? And there was a man, and I'm sorry his name escapes me at this moment, who came up with a wonderful program that if the machine will be able to respond that way, then we'll know it is conscious. Can anyone help me with his name? It's
Turing test.
Pardon?
The Turing test.
Yes, the Turing test. Thank you. Right. Now, if that, could you imagine what it would be like to be able to take, just as right now, I can upload, when I look at my life's work and I see what I have on the computer, on the hard drive, gee, I thunk that. It's so amazing to me. Could you imagine if I were to be able, now, if you ask me right now, I couldn't remember Turing's name, But what would be if there would be already that little ephemeral thing right in there, and I Google up the name of the guy with that test, okay, and right away it would come. Then take a look what else has happened. There is a point in which the frequency, sound frequency, when it goes over 40,000 cycles per second, it has a tendency to jump to become radio frequency, to jump off the wire. Look how much we have become wireless today. And when you can think of what would it take, right now they can put 2,000 CPUs together to divide the work in a parallel processing job that would take a huge computer before to crunch these numbers. Could you imagine if we would be able to create that wireless empathy connection between people so that not only our reason mind would be connected, but what Goldman calls the emotional intelligence stuff, the mirror neurons, that they could begin to communicate much better and much stronger, so that we would be in this kind of messianic telepathy with each other. And telepathy isn't only ideas, it's feeling over distance, what the word originally meant, yeah? So you can get a sense of what that would be like. He makes great promises. Alongside comes Bill Joy, who wrote a difficult statement in Wired magazine once, in which he says, what would happen if you go with nanotechnology as far as you can go, and these robots would be able to, those nanorobots would be able to replicate themselves. And if they invade a body and take over, then it's also possible that all of life would stop. There are people who have warned us on the other side, too. You're going to genetically enhance people. Do you know where this is going to lead? Who knows? And this used to be a question that people would pose at me and say, what is kosher or not kosher about genetically enhanced stuff? I used to be totally against it. I've changed my mind in some ways because the hunger is great, and what can be done to make more blight-resistant crops so that more people would have food without that damaging people. How do we know that? Well, some people are painting a very difficult scenario at the other end. So the question is, which way is it going to go? Is the cultural evolution that's necessary going to be fast enough to be able to overcome the problems that pollution and bad politics are creating in the world? It's a race now. And it's in this race that we need to have some people who understand that we have to work on a level that is not the mundane level anymore. Imagine what it would take to stop the karma that's coming down the pike on all sides right now, and if you would be able to have an irresistible, this kind of immovable object against that irresistible force, could you imagine what kind of a catastrophe this would bring on? How do you meet, we want to be able to meet the threat that comes from radicalized Islam. They want to be able to meet the threat that comes from produce and consume at any cost, capitalism, any cost. So what could you do if the two of them were to clash together and we'd want to stop the whole thing and stop the train? You can't do it that way. Where do you have to go if you want to make any kind of change? And this is why I feel that we need to go back and learn from mystics what their technology was all about. When shamans go into other realms, they can bring about some healing that couldn't be brought about by normal ways in which we do things. Except, do we have any shamans who would want to come and teach in the labs of Naropa? I would like to see such a thing, that we would have, like MIT without labs wouldn't be good, A spiritual school needs to have labs in which we would be doing the kind of empirical work that's necessary to bring about the shifts that have to happen. And they can't happen by one person doing them. We used to believe that there will be one Messiah coming, one Mahdi showing up, one avatar, one Mashiach, and he'll fix the whole business. But it seems to be that the task for us is that we have to become that one. Ibn Matar has this remarkable poem in which it's called The Conference of the Birds. The birds are trying to find out and meet the Simurg, the great Messiah bird when he will come. And they go and meet in the place where the Simurg is supposed to show up, but he isn't there. And then finally, they don't know what to do, so they take off. And as they are in the air, all the birds, and they look down and then see their shadow on the ground, they are the Simurg. It's that kind of an image that we have to be able to foster and bring back. So what I'm getting at is the daily practice that brings us in touch with the archetypes, that looks at dreams from a different perspective than we have looked at dreams up to now. We think of dreams as a certain kind of froth, and all the dream studies that have been made, and I give them all the credit that they deserve for it, because REM sleep and this kind of stuff, and Stanley Krippner in a sleep laboratory, they're all good people and they have done good things. But there is another element to dream, that when you have such a dream, you know that this is not merely a froth dream, that something has come through to you that is guidance. And I would like us to be able to create the liturgies, the ways of being together that would invite such dreams to come. And just like the people who are doing dream time stuff in Australia with each other and are sharing what comes to them, just the same way as the people of the Dead Sea Scrolls would at one point say in the Manual of Discipline, that if you have received any kind of revelation from above, if you haven't shared it, you deserve to be excommunicated. the notion is that these are the kinds of things that need to come back into daily conversation. They need to come back into the media. They need to come back in such a way that the archetypes should wake up. I think that we have put them in a way to sleep because we haven't given them credence, we haven't fed them with that kind of aha, yes, yes, more that's necessary in order to be flooded by them. Jung has done great stuff about it. The people who have written about myth have done great things about it. But if I were to ask you, and I ask you very confidentially, do you live a myth? What's your myth? You know? It was so wonderful when a Christian could say, I lived a myth of the fall and the redemption. He had a story, you know. We have a story in Judaism, the Exodus from Egypt, which goes on all the time because we're always in the narrows and we have to go out of those narrows. Enlightenment is such a story. I don't know if you had a chance to revisit, but if you can, it pays to spend 3-4 hours to sit with Siddhartha, Hesse Siddhartha, and read again and see where your life story is and what would happen if Govinda kissed you at the end of the day. What would flood into his mind in that moment of shared mind melding? So these are the kinds of thoughts that I have. I don't even want to invite questions, you know. It's not something that we could argue about. But what I would like you to do now is first sit a little bit quiet and go back in your mind to those places where you got a little bit of a blip that said, yes, this spoke to me, I need to do something about that. I would like to be able to save that in my file. And then after a few minutes, when you have done it, turn to your neighbor and share a little bit with each other so that we socialize that in this Sangha. If you're gonna sit too long and not talk, you're gonna fall asleep. So talk to your neighbor and share a little bit. We still have about 5 minutes left, and I'd like you to take the mic from Netanel and give us a Quaker-like feedback of what has happened to you, what you have experienced, what you have said is important to you. Please.
I'll start with something I shared with Sharon here. I woke up the other night, couldn't sleep. I went to do some meditation. And before long, I saw an image of just a sparkling image. And it came with a phrase, there are diamonds everywhere. And I don't know quite where to take that, but that phrase has stayed with me, the image has stayed with me, and it's begging me to experience that in this room, in my life. And so today was the first time I shared it with somebody.
So a couple months ago, I was in the Amazons in Colombia, sharing some time with some medicine men from the nation of the Cofanes. And one of the visions I had there, it was said to me that I needed to remember, that we needed to remember that we were brought to this planet to be guardians and to take care of Mother Earth and everything that's in this planet, that we should need it. needed to honor and respect everything, and we needed to honor this mission.
On February 1st, I watched the Global Climate report being produced on BBC and felt fairly depressed about global warming. Then I just went to bed, and I had a dream that was very powerful that night. And just to make it short, in the dream I was invited to Belgium to meet some people to do a ceremony, and I didn't know who the people were or what. But as I proceeded towards the ceremony, I was handed a big armful of reeds. And then I walked downstairs, and I realized that the apartment building that we were in, the ocean water had already penetrated the courtyard. And I couldn't put my purse down to go to the ceremony, so I put it on a chair. And so I was proceeding towards this unknown ceremony where I found I was headed way through the seawater. But it really put my heart into a new place of thinking about meeting global warming, meeting the ocean penetrating into our lives. So that's, I won't give more analysis, so that's my dream.
Again, it's in a dream. It was a dream on the 1st of Adar, where I dreamed that I had to go someplace, and I kept being told, go to the Edgewater Hotel. And I don't know where the Edgewater Hotel is. I just don't know. So I am searching through every book I can find. Nowhere was it in there. And it wasn't until I awoke that I realized it's not till I find that edge of water, which cannot be found through reason, that I will find that which will help me live my myth out.
I probably come from a different background than most people in the room. I'm a writer working on a book about the neural mechanisms behind visions. And I think I've succeeded in that task, but in finishing it, I realized that I haven't captured the mystical experience. And what interests me about what you said today is first, the poverty of the language, that it looks on one hand like a lot of the different mystics are saying essentially the same thing in sort of different ways. But then you said the dimension that I haven't realized, and I find it very powerful in your talk today, is the social dimension. In other words, as you're talking, I'm getting some kind of animal exception from the rest of my mind, which underscores what you're saying. There's a certain amount of authority. Gentlemen here have the same feeling of authenticity. So I'm taking away from this the need to explore that social dimension that you were talking about more thorough.